We are live now. This is the guy from the comment section.
Hi Slater, I'm Mr. Cropper.
Slate? Oh, he just muted himself.
Our purpose is to discuss consciousness.
We cannot hear you, Slate.
You guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah? Alright. Give me 1 sec.
Yeah. I think it's drastically delayed.
On YouTube?
No, like when I talk and then I'm waiting for a response, it takes forever for you to respond back.
Should I leave and jump back?
I mean, you could. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
He says, "Who is Mr. Cropper?" I think that's what that means. Ayo, who Mr. Cropper? I am the bus driver of objectivism. Everybody in objectivism is fighting amongst themselves, and I'm driving this bitch.
Okay, so are you good now?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, is it possible to be a little bit louder?
Yeah. Is this better?
Yeah.
Alright. Okay, so basically, the argument, before I start, this argument was not discovered by me. A friend of mine named Pessimistic Idealism on YouTube compiled this whole document regarding all the quotes regarding, Rand on consciousness and the self and entities and attributes. So I didn't do all this work, and it was a lot of work, so I don't want to take credit for it. That's personal. But basically, the argument is that Rand believes that only entities can act, that only entities have attributes, and that consciousness is both is an entity of man, but it's also something that acts and has attributes. So we have a contradiction.
No, consciousness doesn't act. Man acts. He uses his consciousness.
Okay. I will find quotes that disprove that Rand has many quotes saying that consciousness is something that acts.
Well, I couldn't act without being part of a human that acts. The human's what acts.
Consciousness is an active process, not a motionless medium such as a mirror, which passively reflects reality. To achieve and maintain awareness, a man's consciousness must perform a complex series of actions. That's consciousness performing a complex series of actions. That's Peacock, not Rand. That's from Opar.
Yeah, if that confuses you, then you're just being crazy. It's the man that acts. It's the man that has the consciousness.
Okay, but this is you talking, right? Not Peacock. And here's from Rand, from Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology.
Look, if you are confused by that sentence, then you're just playing word games. Obviously, the consciousness doesn't exist by itself. It's part of a man.
Okay, but I mean, there are dozens of quotes where Rand and Peacock both say that consciousness acts.
Well, what would do the acting if it wasn't the man that had the consciousness?
The consciousness, that's what they're saying.
Then you're just playing word games. You need to just realize that man has consciousness.
Okay, but this is you saying that, right? Objectivism is not whatever Brandon Cropper says, right?
No
Rand says.
No objectivist worth their salt would say that there's consciousness floating out there somewhere without something that has.
Is Ayn Rand an objectivist worth their salt, or was she?
Yes, and she's not saying what you think she's saying. You are being a lightweight.
So this is your interpretation, not what she actually said, right?
You are a lightweight, son.
Okay. Is the self is the self managed consciousness?
See what? You're just a rationalist. You're just dealing with words.
You're being stupid.
You're being stupid. Look, man...
What do words refer to?
Man has a mind. If you
Okay.
want to talk about consciousness, then you're talking about a human being that has a mind. That's just step one. Now, if you go on to step two and say, well, here's a sentence where it appears that just the consciousness, blah, 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 you're just being stupid. You're just a featherweight.
There is no such thing as consciousness, just as there is no such thing as a fully inactive consciousness. Content and action necessitate each other. Every state of consciousness involves two fundamental attributes: the content or object of awareness, and the action or process of consciousness.
Yeah, now
The
what do you
action
think
of
awareness
consciousness.
means? What do you think awareness means in that sentence?
Awareness is consciousness.
No, that is not true. Consciousness is aware of something. What do you think awareness means? Because I'll tell you what it means.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Awareness means the five senses. It means sensory data coming into the mind that possesses
Is
the
that the only way
consciousness.
a person is aware of something?
Yes.
Are you not aware of your emotions? Do you do that through perception or through introspection?
You wouldn't have any emotions at all unless you had sensory perception. All knowledge comes from sensory perception. Even your emotional knowledge, it's emotions about things you perceive. We have no knowledge without sensory data. None.
Okay, so I'm supposed to trust your interpretation of Rand's quotes and not what Rand actually said herself?
You can jump off a bridge for all I care. I don't care who you trust.
I'm asking, is that what I should do?
You should think for yourself, which you are not doing a very good job of.
I'm reading exactly what... Objectivism is Rand's system of philosophy, is it not?
Okay. Touche.
It is, right?
Touche.
So it's what she said. So it's her works on metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, and aesthetics, right?
Oh, you got me there.
I don't... how old are you? You're so childish.
No, you are being stupid, man. Saying that consciousness is just acting on its own? Of course
No,
it
I'm
cannot
not
act
saying
on
that.
its own. Consciousness is part of a man, part of a human
I'm not
being.
saying that. I'm saying that Rand's account is contradictory. Of course, it's going to sound absurd.
No, she did not
because that's
say. She did not say that there's consciousness disembodied from mankind. She did not say.
Does consciousness have attributes?
Sure, of course it does.
Like volition, right? That's what Rand said.
No.
Rand says that volition is an attribute of consciousness.
Humans have volition. Humans also have consciousness.
So consciousness, it has attributes like what?
Like it's finite.
Okay. That's not necessarily an attribute, at least in Rand's terms, because attribute is something that is indivisible. But let's take that. She also said that only entities have attributes. So is consciousness an entity or an attribute?
It's an attribute of man, and it is an aspect of the entity of a human being. I've read everything Ayn Rand ever wrote.
Clearly, you didn't read Ito, with a
yes, I read
magnifying
Ito.
glass,
Objectivism or Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. Is that what you're quoting from?
Not that you didn't read it, but not.
Yeah, I read it.
But that you didn't read it with an eye that is good enough to realize these critiques.
Well, you've given us no evidence for that yet. All you've shown us is that you can't think.
Okay, attributes cannot exist by themselves. They are merely the characteristics of entities. So if you're saying that consciousness has attributes, you're saying that consciousness is an entity, right?
You're just playing word games.
Do words not refer to things in reality? This is what Rand
Yes,
says.
and you're treating them like they don't. Words refer to things in reality. Consciousness is an attribute of man.
So what does Rand mean when she says that attributes are only the characteristics of entities?
She means that something has to exist in order for there to be an attribute at all. There can be no attributions without things that exist. It's the law of identity. That's what she means.
So she's not saying that attributes only apply to entities?
She's saying attributes cannot exist unless there's an entity that has the attribute.
Right, so the attributes for consciousness can't exist unless there's an entity of consciousness to have them?
That's pretty obvious, isn't it?
So consciousness is an entity?
Okay.
Or is it an attribute?
It's an attribute of human beings.
So is it an entity or an attribute?
Where are you going with this? You're just playing word games.
Because they can't be both, right? Rand says herself that an attribute cannot exist by themselves. They have to be an attribute of an entity. So it can't be both an attribute and an entity. That's contradictory. It has to be one or the other.
That's
but if it acts or if it has...
single stupidest thing I've heard this week, buddy.
Do you have a response, or are you just going to insult what I'm saying?
What do you haven't said anything. You've said, I'm going to play word games. What do you think of that? Well, I don't think much of it.
Okay, so do attributes have attributes, or no?
And look, if this is all you got, this is all you got, man. That's not
So
my problem. That's not my fault.
Do you not have a response?
You don't even know what you're saying, do you? You have no clue what you're saying.
This is the same. I mean,
What is an attribute? I'll tell you what. Define attribute.
My definition, or right?
Yeah, yours.
That's not what I'm here to do. I don't have my ontology figured out.
What do you think an attribute is? What do you think an attribute is?
It's something possessed by an entity.
Then why are you so confused?
Because my point here is not to give my ontology. It's to disprove Rand's ontology. I'm not here.
Well, you're not.
16. I haven't.
You are doing a sucky job, son.
It's why you're not responding to my points.
What? You're not making any points, dude. You're just playing with words.
Do attributes have attributes, or no? Can an attribute have an attribute?
No, you're playing with words. That's stupid. Of course, an attribute can't have an attribute.
They can.
Cannot.
They can't. So is consciousness an attribute?
What is consciousness? What do you think consciousness is?
Rand defines it as a faculty perceiving that which exists. I've read Rand. You're acting like I'm just some kid, like I don't know what I'm talking about. Trust me, I was an objectivist for 2 years.
You were not an objectivist.
This is like cult mentality. If I think I figured out that Rand was wrong on some things, then therefore I was never an objectivist. I was.
Well, go ahead. Give me something Rand was wrong about.
Did I not just do that?
No, you're just playing stupid word games. And you don't even know what the words mean that you're saying.
You said that attributes don't have attributes, right? Right?
Go ahead. Give me something I can sink my teeth into. Quit playing word games.
Yeah, hello? You guys can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Alright, let's give this a little structure here. What was the first quote? Let's start from... what was the main quote that was focused on that's at the crux of this? Because it's going around in circles just a little bit, just about.
Well, there's like dozens of quotes.
Yeah, I get you, but what's like one that you say captures the essential nature that you're trying to show, that she said this, or maybe outline what you're saying she said, and then give it a quote that really shows that essential, how she said that, right? Where she really put the point on what you're trying to say she said, right?
Well, one, there are times where she just straight out calls consciousness an entity, although you could say that she's using it colloquially, and I would accept that. I don't think she was being technical when she said that, but there are dozens of quotes of her saying that consciousness is something that acts, and she says that consciousness is something that possesses attributes. For example, she says man's volition is an attribute of his consciousness. This is from, I think it was from, for the New Intellectual, I'm not sure. The attributes and functions of consciousness are what they are. That's Peikoff from Opar. By its nature as an attribute of man's consciousness, each constitutes part of the context in which epistemological concepts arise. That's also Peikoff from Opar. Every state of consciousness involves two fundamental attributes, the content or object of awareness and the action or process of consciousness in regard to that content. That's Ito. Two fundamental attributes are involved in every state. That's Ito. So that's one, that she says that consciousness has attributes.
Would you feel better if she stopped saying consciousness and started saying man?
I don't know what the point of that is. I don't know.
I don't know what the point of your crap is. What if she said...
Can I finish before?
Reread any of those quotes and replace consciousness with man.
Are those interchangeable?
Yes.
Because if they are, then consciousness isn't an attribute, right?
They're interchangeable. Try it. Try any of those sentences. Just replace consciousness with man in any of those sentences.
Man's volition is an attribute of his consciousness, of his rational faculty, and consists in the choice to perceive existence or to evade it. So this is with, replacing consciousness with man. Man's volition is an attribute of his manness. That doesn't make sense. Of his rational faculty, and consists in the choice to perceive existence or to evade it. So that didn't
Well,
work.
if we took
It's a nice dialogue.
manness to mean conceptual consciousness, then that would be perfect, because that's
Why
what
would we
man
take
means.
this? I thought the definition of man was a rational animal.
Yeah, and what does rational mean? Oh my God, you are just playing with words. You don't even care what these words mean, do you? You're just playing with words and totally ignoring what a human being is. Let's drop what a human being is and just talk about consciousness. That's the dumbest fucking thing I've seen all week.
I'm talking about her ontology regarding.
You aren't
consciousness.
talking
Obviously.
about anything but word games. If you're talking about consciousness, then you're talking about human beings. Human beings are the only thing that have conceptual consciousness. So when you read a sentence that says consciousness, remember that you're talking about a man who owns that consciousness. And you just want to forget that. You want to say, well, what if there wasn't?
I don't know what the point of you saying that. Yeah, man.
Oh, that doesn't
is
surprise me.
self-conscious.
That doesn't surprise me.
Well, maybe the question would be what is the error in?
Ibis, are you the host here?
What is the the derivative error that you see in the philosophy because of this view, Slater?
Yeah,
well, there's one
does it
error
amount to?
is that she says that the self is man's consciousness, so man's consciousness is his self. But if consciousness is an attribute of man, then obviously, the attribute of man is not the self is not an attribute of man. The self is, who the man is.
That's just word games.
You're acting like words are just some. I'm the rationalist here, but you're the one acting like words are just some abstract things that don't refer to anything.
No, you are acting like words don't refer to anything.
I'm
saying consciousness refers to something that's conscious, namely a man. You're saying, well, it doesn't seem like it in this sentence. It seems like consciousness has its own attributes. Well, just fuck off.
Ibis, can you bring in pessimistic idealism? He's the one that.
I don't know how to.
Is Kadri not here? Whoever the host is should. Okay.
Does this guy have anything better, Mr. Pessimistic Idealism?
Ryan, you here?
Can you hear? He looks like he's fixing.
He's fixing to wreck our shit.
Fixing to wreck the shit.
Can you hear me?
There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Welcome to the late night show.
Hello. Can you hear me on the microphone?
Yes.
Yeah, we can
No.
hear you. We can hear you.
Yes, I could hear. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hang on. Okay. How about now? Is it working?
Yeah, you're good.
Still working.
Yes. Cool. Okay. So, I was the one to craft... Yeah, thank you. Hello. Oh, shit. That's why it's...
Now we cannot hear you, because now you're muted and now you're gone. All right. Yeah, I would like to hear you, Slater, give us something about where you're going with this. If your point is true, then what?
Well, then objectivism is wrong, right? Reality doesn't contradict itself, so...
So objectivism's right,
contradictory.
because what you've said hasn't amounted to a hill of beans.
Well, not only is that just logically full...
Okay. Sorry about that.
Something.
Logic is connected to reality. You're not connected to reality.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry about that. I had my phone hooked in with the Bluetooth. Okay. So, I have read Ayn Rand's nonfiction literature a lot, many, many times, all the way through, taken tons of annotations. So I'll give an overview of her ontology, and I'd be happy to back this up with quotes, passages, the like. She divides reality up into several categories, if you want to call it that. There's existence, so with existence plural, and those can be divided up into entities and attributes. That's what she says exhausts reality. And we don't need to worry about mental concepts and things like that right now, which she would call mental concretes. But we're just focusing on the primary existence, which are entities, and their attributes, which Rand uses them in the sense of properties. Traditionally, attributes are the essential properties of something. Like Descartes thought that extension was an essential property of a body. But Rand uses attribute just interchangeably with property, which is perfectly fine. So this is what if I could post it in the I could share my screen, but I'll just do this for now. So these are some characteristics of attributes that Rand brings up, and I'd be happy to cite these. 1, all attributes are attributes of entities. That's a fact. Okay. 2nd, attributes cannot act. Only entities act. Peikoff and Rand say this a lot. There are no attributes without entities. That's another thing. And I'd agree with that. Attributes cannot exist by themselves. They're not primary existence, unlike entities. Attributes are indivisible. They can't be broken up into parts, unlike a log, let's say. You could chop that up into smaller logs. Attributes like redness, let's say. You can't cut up redness or sweetness, anything like that. Another thing, a single attribute cannot be an entity. You can't have redness floating around. It's always an attribute of something. So a thing, an entity, always has to have at least one attribute. It can't just be one attribute itself. All attributes together are the entity. So this is getting into some murky waters here, but we could ignore that because it's not important here. Attributes are characteristics of entities. Okay. Next, entities. Only entities can exist by themselves. Only entities have parts. So by parts, she just means they could be broken up, basically. Like mereologically speaking, like you could chop a log in half. You got one log here, one log there. Perfectly fine. Only entities act. That's another thing. Only entities have attributes. Only entities are causally efficacious. An entity implies a physical thing. Entities can be reduced to their parts. Entities are made of specific attributes. And relationships are relationships among entities. So, going into some stuff, Rand has 2 ways of regarding consciousness. One is to treat it as the awareness itself. So I am conscious of X, let's say. Or she uses it in this sense. My consciousness is perceiving X. So in one sense, it's me doing the perceiving, and in another sense, it's my consciousness doing the perceiving. So that's fine for now.
No, you're divorcing them. There's no divorcing those two.
This is what she does.
No. She would not divorce them. You are divorcing them. For Ayn Rand, consciousness is always possessed by an individual human being. You are trying to talk about consciousness separate from the human being. You're trying to separate them. She would not separate them.
No, I'm not. No,
well, okay, I'll hold you to that, because if you try to separate them, then we're going to come right back to this point.
I'm not, I don't believe that I'm not a dualist, so I don't.
So anytime
nor is Rand.
Anytime you use the word consciousness, you're talking about an individual man.
Yes, I'm talking about a person. I'm talking about a. Well, we can go into that part later, but this is what she says. So let me just go from the top. So I have here from Ito. Let's see here. Something exists which one perceives. So let's see, good one. Man's consciousness develops in 3 stages. It's perfectly fine. It's possessed by a man. I'd agree. I don't hold consciousness to be something substantive. I hold it to be a kind of action or process. But that's just my personal thing. It may be supposed that the concept existent is implicit even on the level of sensations, and to that extent, that a consciousness is able to discriminate on that level. But let me get to something more substantive here. Consciousness, unlike existence, is a property. Consciousness is an attribute of certain living entities, but it is not an attribute of a given state of awareness. It is that state. So this is where she's using consciousness in the sense of being like a state of a person's awareness. But here's another one.
Let me
Consciousness
just say,
is not a passive state. Sure.
relative to that quote you just gave, she says consciousness is to be conscious of something.
Exactly. There can be no consciousness without an object of consciousness. I'm in complete agreement, and she seems to be in complete agreement with that as well. So I have no qualms with that. Now, when we try to, like, this is another one. The standard of measurement that differentiates one type of consciousness from another is its range. Consciousness is the faculty of awareness, the faculty of perceiving that which exists. Let's see here. It is only in relation to the external world that various actions of a consciousness can be experienced, grasped, defined, or communicated. Directly or indirectly, every phenomenon of consciousness is derived from one's awareness in the external world. Two fundamental attributes are involved in every state, aspect, or function of man's consciousness: content and action. The content of awareness and the action of consciousness in regard to that content. If one consciousness, one must isolate the action from the content of a given state of consciousness by a process of abstraction, just as, extrospectively, man can abstract attributes from entities. So, introspectively, he can abstract from the actions of his consciousness, from its contents, and observe the differences among these various actions. For instance, this is another quote, this is an important one. On the adult level, when a man sees a woman walking down the street, the action of his consciousness is perception. When he notes that she is beautiful, the action of his consciousness is evaluation. When he experiences an inner state of pleasure and approval or admiration, the action of his consciousness is emotion. When he stops to watch her and draws conclusions from the evidence about her, age, social position, etc., the action of his consciousness is thought. When, later, he recalls the incident, the action of his consciousness is reminiscence. When he projects that her appearance would be improved if her hair were blonde rather than brown, and her dress were blue rather than red, the action of his consciousness is imagination. That's Ito 30. Ito 30 again. He can also observe the similarities among the actions of his consciousness on various occasions by observing the fact that these are the same actions in different sequences, combinations, and degrees are, have been, or can be applicable to other objects. Let's see here, what's a good one? When he grasps, this is from Ito 44, when he grasps that man's distinctive characteristic is this type of consciousness, a consciousness able to abstract, to form concepts, to apprehend reality by a process of reason, he reaches the only, or the one and only, valid definition of man within the context of his knowledge and all of mankind's knowledge to date. Since this is Ito 63, since consciousness is a specific faculty, it has a specific nature or identity, and therefore its range is limited. It cannot perceive everything at once, since awareness on all its levels requires an active process. Let's see. Objectivity begins with the realization that man, including his consciousness, is an entity of a specific nature who must act accordingly. Man is born tabula rasa. All his knowledge is based on and derived from the evidence of his senses. To reach the distinctively human level of cognition, he must conceptualize his perceptual data, and conceptualization is a process which is neither automatic nor infallible. Man needs to discover a method to guide this process if it is to yield conclusions which correspond to the facts of reality, i.e., which represent knowledge. But let's see here. Here we go. This is from Ito 146. Then you consider, quote, what do I have inside my mind, end quote. And you see that it is exclusively made up of content derived from the outside world, from existence. Ultimately, the content of your consciousness, since it begins tabula rasa, consists entirely of your awareness of the outside world. This is Ito 166. One's own consciousness serves as the observer, and the process of consciousness as the observed, as the object which observes and integrates. So clearly, this is Rand making the bifurcation here, but I'll keep going.
Wait.
From
I didn't.
let me finish this one.
I didn't see any bifurcation.
Let me go back up. What do I have inside of my mind? So me, let's say me, a self, a person. What's in my mind? So when I say I, and then I say what's in my mind, let's say, I'm separating, but it's not in the sense of like two different substances or one existing like disembodied from the other, but just a simple like, for example, my forearm and my finger. They're two different things. They're connected, obviously, but they're two different things. So this is what she says here. Ultimately, the content of your consciousness, when I look inside of my mind, that's your consciousness. It's not content inside you. It's the content inside your consciousness. But let's see here. When I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts. So I've been going down only one side of a chart here, and this side of the chart was consciousness is a faculty. There's another side of this chart that is consciousness as awareness, and yeah, she treats it as a faculty in one sense that's doing things, and one sense as a process itself. So like think of, in one sense, you have a runner running,
consciousness,
and then you have running.
Consciousness is the faculty of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to separate consciousness and awareness. It's the faculty of awareness.
Can awareness perceive?
Consciousness perceives. Human beings perceive. Man perceives using his consciousness. Using his
consciousness is awareness, you just said.
Yeah. To be conscious is to be aware of something.
Okay. And consciousness is a faculty. It operates. It's call it like a machine if you want, in that sense. It has particular tasks that it accomplishes. It is not itself a task. It's not itself a like think of it this way. A runner, they run, okay? So the running is an action of the runner. You
would say swinging your arms does not make a person run, and yet runners swing their arms. So now what? That's how you're acting.
No.
You can't separate
running
these things.
Running does not run.
You can't separate these things.
Running does not run.
Awareness, right? Consciousness
running does not run.
Okay, consciousness is awareness. Consciousness is awareness. Now, if
can awareness perceive?
Awareness is perception.
Yes. And she says that consciousness engages in activity. The action of your consciousness is reminiscence. The action of your consciousness is perception. The action of your awareness is the action.
No.
This is what she says. She says it she has two different ways of regarding consciousness. One as a thing, another as an activity of a thing. And the activity of a thing being the person's self.
When she regards it as a thing, then it's an attribute of man. When she regards it as an activity of a thing, then the thing is man. So we're just talking about individual men right now.
Right. And a man is his self, right?
Fair enough.
Sure. But Rand also holds that a person's self to be their consciousness. That's what they are. The most distinctive thing about him, more than the body, is his consciousness, and that is his self. That's what she explicitly says. She says that in her, what do you call it? Let me pull this up. She says, here we go. The basic fact, let me see here. Here we go. Let me pull this up. I have a chart here, but it's kind of getting lost. Here we go. So. Well, you can speak while I'm pulling this up. I'm curious to hear some more you have to say.
I mean, you're reading really great quotes from Rand. These are all perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with any of them.
Sure. Now, when we have a person as a self, and we say that, well, myself is an entity, right? Obviously, I have attributes. I have, like I'm talking to you right now. That's an action of me. An action you could call like an attribute, basically. I have the property of acting right now. Clearly, if I was an attribute, what would I be an attribute of if I wasn't an attribute of myself? Like, basically, my brain is mine. It's not, myself is not an attribute of my brain. One thing has priority over the other. I'm not a slave to my brain. My brain is a thing of mine. I possess it. Now, if myself is an entity and not an attribute, then I can engage in activity because I'm an entity. But attributes cannot act. That's something that she holds. And I would hold as well. I think it's kind of silly to say that the redness acts or running acts, things like that. But if myself is my consciousness, then my consciousness... Sure.
Yourself is not your consciousness. Yourself is you, your entire you. Part of you is that you're conscious. These are word games. These are meaningless word games.
Well, I think the ontology of the self is pretty important here, but I don't know if I'd call it a word game. I would say that it's something more fundamental than that. Let me grab this one second. Okay, so with Rand, though, so she would not say, and you're saying this here, that a person's self is not their consciousness, or not only their consciousness, in the sense, it's more than that. You're saying
it includes your fingernails and your hair and everything else. Yourself does.
So there was more of me. Let's see, I don't know. So every single moment, myself is there's less of myself. I mean, because if you extend it to that, I mean, every single moment, I'm a different self, basically. If you want to, I mean, I would say that the self endures. It's something that is 100% the entire time. But let's go to Rand to see what she has to say. PWNI, Philosophy Who Needs It, page 50. A man's self is his mind. FNI, for the new intellectual. The self you have betrayed is your mind. FNI, 142, for the new intellectual. Your self is your mind. FNI, 90. His vision, his strength, his courage came from his own spirit. A man's spirit, however, is his self, that entity which is his consciousness. To think, to feel, to judge, to act are functions of the ego. This is Ayn Rand's journals, while reading John Galt's speech. Your consciousness is that which you know, and you are alone to know, by direct perception. It is that indivisible unit where knowledge and being are one. It is your I. It is that self which distinguishes you from all else in the universe.
Now that was pretty good right there. It's that indivisible unit.
Yes, I would agree.
You're trying to divide it, and you're trying to say, well, is it part of a man, or is it the man itself? What is it?
A man's self is his mind.
It's not. You cannot divide.
That's what Rand just said. And
it's not divisible. It's not
FNI,
divisible.
She says it again. FNI, 142, she says it again.
You cannot separate consciousness from the person that's conscious.
Well, it's not a physical separation here.
Yeah, I know. You're just being rationalistic about it.
No. That's
I think
that word's meaningless.
The problem here is, and this is what has happened every single time, pessimistic idealism, and I have introduced this issue to objectivists, and it's a problem of interpretation. We're taking Rand at her word.
No.
You're the one who's interpreting her in some loose sense.
No, you're not taking.
So what does she mean when she says yourself is your mind?
You're purposefully misunderstanding it. You're trying to bifurcate it into two things, and it's not two things. Like she just said, it's indivisible. It's a one whole.
Yeah, it's indivisible because it's an attribute. Attributes are indivisible. So they're.
But what is yourself the attribute
That's what
of?
she's saying. You can't break it down any more than you could break down redness or sweetness. or I don't know, hardness, anything of those, any attribute like that. You can't break it down. You can't reduce it to anything.
If the self is man's consciousness, and consciousness is an attribute, then what is the self an attribute of?
See, there's 3 floating abstractions you got. You got self, consciousness, and attribute, and you're just playing with them. You don't even care what they refer to in reality.
No. If I went through every bit of literature, secondary literature, primary sources, and there's all of these problems, no one can agree on one simple thing, that's a problem.
There's no problem.
So for example,
You've shown no
yes,
problem.
there is. Yes, there is.
You haven't.
Let me. So
it's been long enough. Why don't you bring it up already?
Sure. Okay. So Slater, I'll just go like this. There are no. So I'm just going to read down the line. Okay. There are no attributes without entities. There are no actions without entities. Ito 264. Attributes and actions cannot exist apart from the entity. Ito 265. An action cannot exist without something that acts. Ito 265. Actions are caused by entities. Ito 285. By action, we mean the action of an entity. Ito 291. Entities and their actions are measured by their attributes, length, weight, velocity, etc. It's Ito 7 through 8. Entity, as we have seen, is the primary category. Only entities can act, and to be an entity is to be an individual. OPAR 196. So far, this is what we got. There are no attributes without entities. There are no actions without entities. Actions cannot exist apart from entities. Attributes cannot exist apart from entities. Actions are performed by entities. Actions are performed by entities again. Only entities can act. And here's some more. And especially important in considering the law of cause and effect, there are no floating actions. There are only actions performed by entities. Action is the name for what entities do. Walking or digesting have no existence or possibility apart from the creature with legs that walks, or the body or organ with enzymes that does the digesting. That's OPAR 14. Given the facts that action is an action of entities, and that every entity has a nature, both of which facts are known simply by observation, it is self-evident that an entity must act in accordance with its nature. So this is what we got now. Actions are what entities do. Actions are only performed by entities. Every action is an action of an entity. Here's another one, OPAR 15. The law of causality, Ayn Rand sums up, is the law of identity applied to action. All actions are caused by entities. The nature of an action is caused and determined by the nature of the entities that act. A thing cannot act in contradiction to its nature. OPAR 16, 1 page later. Action is the crux of the law of cause and effect. It is an action that is caused by entities. Now, nature of attributes. This is also, this is from Ito here. This is a question. If the question is, quote, what is the CCD, or conceptual common denominator, the concept attribute? The answer is entity. An attribute is something which is not the entity itself. No one attribute constitutes the whole entity, but all of them together are the entity, not possessed by, but are the entity. Okay, so what do we get from this? A single attribute is not the whole entity. All attributes together are the entity. Next, all attributes, in order to be measured, have to be reduced to the kind of unit which we can perceive, and by means of which we can establish a quantitative relationship. Next, an attribute is one aspect or characteristic of an entity, an indivisible aspect or characteristic, which cannot be factually, metaphysically separated, and cannot exist by itself.
Okay,
so this is what we have now.
If consciousness is an attribute, read that sentence again and dwell on that thought. You cannot separate it from the entity. It's simply one of the attributes of the entity.
Sure, yeah, exactly. She would agree with that. The point is that she is committing herself to a contradiction. She cannot say that a thing, let me rephrase that. She cannot say that an attribute is doing the acting and not say...
She doesn't say that. She does not say an attribute is doing the acting.
Yes, she does.
No, the individual man...
Say it.
It's the individual man that does the acting.
She's not saying that, though. You're
Yeah,
the
she
one
is.
insisting that.
Yes,
she's
she
saying
is
that.
saying that she would never make a bifurcation between, like the sentence you just went over. No attribute
Yes,
stands
the
by
thing is,
itself.
it's an internal contradiction.
An entity
she contradicts herself.
An entity is the totality of its attributes.
Yeah.
So you
No
can't,
one attribute constitutes a whole entity.
So you can't separate one attribute and then get confused about it. Not if you read that sentence and hold it in your mind. I mean, you have to totally ignore half the stuff she says to be confused by the stuff you're confused
Yes,
by.
that's because half of it contradicts the other half. That's
No.
You're
It's not a
misunderstanding
contradiction.
something.
It's not a contradiction. You guys are
contradiction
trying to separate
exists
things. She specifically says these things cannot be separated. And you say, well,
Yes,
but if
that's
we
the
separate them,
contradiction.
if you separate them, then there's contradictions. But she would never separate them. That's you doing that. She just
doing it
said
herself.
an entity is the totality of its attributes. You're the one that's trying to separate them and treat them as floating abstractions that have no connection to reality. That's what you're trying to do.
Nonsense. Let me go down the line here.
Nonsense is a good description of what you're talking about. Nonsense
Man's
is...
consciousness develops. So she just separated man. Look, she just separated man from the consciousness. Man's consciousness develops. Why couldn't she just say man develops?
Well,
in
you're
three
not.
stages?
You're a fucking
Yeah,
featherweight.
this
You're
is-
a featherweight. You can't even read
Look,
one goddamn
look,
sentence. You
shut
can't
up.
read one single sentence and make sense of it in your mind. You're a featherweight, man.
Nonsense. Units are things viewed by a consciousness in certain existing relationships. I toe page 7. Did you ever get that far? Note that the concept unit involves an act of consciousness. It is not an arbitrary creation of consciousness. It is a method of identification or classification according to which the attributes are the attributes which a consciousness observes in reality. So again, a consciousness observes. And let's go again.
A consciousness.
In order to form a
Wait. Consciousnesses do not observe anything. Only men observe things.
A consciousness observes in reality.
Yeah, she said herself
page 7.
just 2
That's
minutes
your
ago.
interpretation.
2 minutes
Not
ago.
Rand.
2 minutes ago, you said that an entity is the totality of its attributes. Now
Yes.
you're trying to separate the
It's
entity.
not a single one of them.
Now you're trying to separate the entity and its attributes, and she would not go
No,
for that.
I am not, dude.
Yes, you
This is
are.
Look,
Yes, you
How
are.
about that? How about that?
Yes, you are.
I haven't been saying anything of my own opinion. I've only been saying Rand's word.
She says consciousness does X. And you say, well, is it consciousness or man? But she also said that an entity is the totality of its attributes. Can you not hold two thoughts in your head at the same
It's not the
time?
same thing as a person's arm.
You can't hold
Dude.
more than one thought in your head at once, can you? You're
Dude,
that
dude,
fucking
dude.
dumb!
Look, Boomer, calm down. Grammar pertains
You're
to the
a
actions of
fucking
consciousness.
moron.
Page 30.
Oh, gee, I'm still recording, aren't I? Well, that was fun, wasn't it, ladies and gentlemen?